It feels like you were wrong on your prediction. Do you agree with that?
User error, Tim. Hey, I don't know where you buy your dogs from, but my dog is barking fine.
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE brings together a panel of the smartest minds in technology to distill down what's important in the crazy world of artificial intelligence. We've got a tradition here at MOE where at the end of the year, we record short clips with all of our experts talking a little bit about what happened in the year that's ending and where we're going to be going into next year. So without further ado, here is the holiday clip episode for Mixture of Experts.
Chris, thanks for joining us for our end of year episode. This is a little bit of a kind of clip episode that we do at the end of the season. We're talking with all of our experts about the predictions they made last year and whether or not they were right and where we're going into 2026. And, I was just catching up on some of your predictions, and you were a big agent booster at the end of 2024. You're like, 2025 is going to be the year of the agents. It's going to be the biggest thing, best thing since sliced bread. But I got to say, I feel like we're now, November, December 2025, and it seems like agents are like the dog that didn't bark this year, right? Like I'm not using agents to go book travel. I'm not using them to, I'm just not using them in the way that was promised. And so I guess I want to say, like, it feels like you were wrong on your prediction. Do you agree with that?
User error, Tim. Hey, I don't know where you buy your dogs from, but my dog is barking fine. So
all right, great. Well, tell me about it. I mean, yeah.
I think what I said, Tim, I went even further. I think I said 2025 is going to be the year of the super agent.
Agents, overhyped in 2024 or underhyped in 2024?
Underhyped, not hyped enough. Agents are the world. Agents are everything. And in 2025, We're going to have super agents. That's what's coming in 25.
I don't even know what that means.
I knew you didn't at the time.
And when you say super agent, what do you mean exactly?
I just made up the term, Tim. So
you heard it here first on MOE.
And I think I said at the time it was just going to be like, we're going to have, we combine reasoning and we combine tools, and then the agent is going to be able to do multiple things. And I think that's true, actually. If I really think about where we were in 24, agents were very small and specialized, and you would have an individual thing. This is the email writing agent. This is the research agent, whatever, right? And they did the one specialized thing, and of course we moved into this multi-agent world. But actually, reasoning has came into the models, and now what we're seeing is with reasoning, with test and compute, the models are able to think much longer, and they're able to plan, and they're able to use much more tools and actually say, okay, I've got this tool and I've got this tool. I'm going to call this to be able to achieve that goal. So I think I am defending my cause, but I think I was right? Which is reasoning was going to make a big impact there. And then from a super agent point of view, I do think we've moved away from specialized agents. I think there's still a place for them. But if you think of things like Manus, which we talked about earlier in the year, where I submit one job and then Manus goes off, and then, about 30 minutes later, it's created my entire presentation. And it's used a multitude of tools to be able to do that. That really is kind of the super agent that I was talking about. And I do think that is gonna continue. And I think it has taken off. We've seen Manuses. We've seen things like, Claude Code come out, and, which we're using from a coding assistant perspective. We even think about ChatGPT itself and Claude. You're able to put your connectors in, and then Claude is going to be able to work with the different connectors and go talk to different systems. ChatGPT will go off. It will create your PowerPoints. It will create your code, et cetera, on the canvas. So I think ChatGPT, I think Claude, and I think Gemini, they're all evolving themselves into these super agents. And I think that is the space where everybody wants to go, because as much as we may want these specialized agents, the reality is, the major frontier AI players are going to want you to come to their one agent. And I think it's too hard. I mean, I think about the marketplace of agents, and I think it's too hard to ask a user, oh, you need to write a PowerPoint deck? Well, you need to add in the PowerPoint agent. Oh, no, now you want to write Word? No, you need to add in the Word agent. Oh, you're doing research? No, you need to put the research. It's too much. It's too much agents, too much tools, right? What you want to do is just speak to that orchestrator and say, hey, I want you to do this task. You go look up the tools that you need to use. And then if you've got some buddy friends who are agents as well, you go and deal with them and come back to me with the answer. So I think that has happened. It's maybe not the way that we want it. I think there's much further to go, but I do think that has happened, and that is the fight, because whoever is that front door to the super agent is the one that's going to control the market as much as possible.
That is a good point, right? Like, I mean, if you're using reasoning and planning as kind of one of the distinctive agentic features, if you will, it's true. I mean, I use like deep research all the time, right? That's used agents. It's almost like the old adage, like the adage of like, oh, if it works, it's not AI anymore. It's almost like if the agent works, it just becomes AI. Like I don't even think about it as an agent anymore. It just like disappears. It's just AI basically.
But do you remember that? Would you remember that though, Tim? I mean, because if we go back a year to like November last year, I think even things like web search within ChatGPT was experimental at that point. We certainly didn't have Google AI overviews and stuff like that. So agents has just been brought into our workflow and just part of our consumer products, but we don't think about it in that way, to your point, anymore. We're just using the tools, right? You remember ChatGPT when you did a search and, without agent tools, who's Chris Hay of IBM? I'm frequently, without web search, I'm the chief finance officer for IBM, right? Which is, you wouldn't want to put me in touch with IBM's money. We'd be broke. So, so I do think it has happened. We just don't think about it in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And I think the other point that you raised, which I think is really interesting, is this kind of coming battle between who's going to be the like front door on these agents. Because I think the joke that I always had with agents is like, yeah, if you have an agent for PowerPoint, an agent for writing, and an agent for research, it's like, agents, do you mean apps? Like just like normal software on your computer? Like it starts to resemble basically like what we had before. The thing that does really make it genuinely feel new is if there is this kind of orchestrator agent, which is just like the front door for all of these requests. And yeah, I can see obviously there's a big coming battle between all of the big, kind of frontier AI companies on this front. I guess kind of question for you is like if you feel like any one is more well positioned than the other to kind of like, win in this space, or if it really will be kind of just like everybody wins,
I hope it's everybody wins. I just think that if you're, ChatGPT is obviously fighting for that space, especially with things like commerce and deep research, etc. Google's fighting for that space for search. So they're all going to be fighting against each other for that. Claude is really they're fighting for the enterprise, and they're fighting for the kind of the coding side of things. So I think everybody's fighting against each other in that sense. I imagine Amazon's going to do the same for shopping and stuff like that as well, because Shopify will release their thing. So I think that the space should be open. I hope it will be open, but who knows? But we are seeing that channel become important because, again, the other thing that we've seen this year is the agentic browser. Yeah, so we've seen Perplexity release the Comet browser, ChatGPT's released their browser. I'm quite sure Google's put Gemini in Chrome if they haven't already. Everybody's fighting after that browser space, and then you're seeing the same thing on the mobile app as well, right? With Apple extending Siri at some point, whenever that will be. So I think and then Gemini get embedded into Android. So I think that digital front point, and then all the voice models. ChatGPT, for example. So I think the fight for the browser, fight for the mobile, again, is part of that kind of front door super agent space as well. So we are seeing that this year. Again, there's much of a muchness between all of the providers, if we're truly honest. If somebody does something truly breakthrough, where it's just different level from anybody else, then I think that's going to get super interesting. But I'm not sure that's going to happen next year, though.
I mean, I think it's kind of that definitely opens up the sort of front door discussion in a way that I hadn't thought about. Is like, I was very much thinking about like the chat window, right? But part of this battle is like what existing software paradigm or platform can you bolt the agent onto as a way of bootstrapping this, right? They're like, oh, you know browsers? Well, now there's agents in it. Or like, Amazon from buying things? Like now there's agents in it. And it's kind of like everybody's also trying to figure out like if that's the best way to get agentic uptake is like take an existing paradigm that people understand and then just like make it better with the agent as a way of kind of strapping this up rather than having, there's this new thing called a chat window and now it can do agentic things basically.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and I think you're right there. I mean, we are seeing that already. It's like all these front doors, you put something in there. So that's what's happened in the code editors, right? Every single coding editor now has got an agent in there. I think what Google did recently is quite interesting with anti-gravity, right? Because although it's obviously a fork of VS Code and it's got its own issues, etc., and its agents in the editor. But what they've done that's quite interesting is they also have the ability to run the agents outside of that as well. So you can run your agents in the terminal, and they've got the inbox, etc. So you'll be able to control your agents from the outside. And again, that's kind of back to that Manus style. Here's my task workflows, and then it's going to run in the background. So if I start to think about 26, see what I did here? We moved from 25 to 26. I think if I start to think of 26, I think being able to control your agents centrally, either anti-gravity or Manus style, but have those same agents be able to operate in different environment, I can see that being a thing, right? And they're all going to start fighting across that space. So I think that sort of agent control plane type thing and multi-agent dashboard, I can see that happening. And we go and like we would look at our inbox, go kick off this agent to do this, go kick off that agent to do that. I see that being a thing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to return to that like a lot more in 26 is like the kind of agent control dashboard, how that looks like. How do we go about doing it is like a really interesting area of development, I think, in the next 12 months. Well, Chris, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. And we'll see how these predictions turn out in 26.
Fun.
Gabe, thanks for joining us for our year-end episode. We want to have you on because in some ways, everybody was saying that 2025 was the year of agents, and it kind of was, but in my mind, it was really the year of open source, right? We saw these models just get better and better and better, and like the gap between proprietary so-called state-of-the-art and where open source is just has continued to narrow and narrow and narrow. And arguably with Kimi K2 Thinking, we're now in a world where even open source is now like ahead of where these kind of proprietary models are. And so I kind of want to start with like a note of kind of sober assessment. It's very easy to be like open source has won, open source is the best, and now has conclusively destroyed, Anthropic and OpenAI on its way to world conquest. But it strikes me that we should have a little bit of hesitance and talk a little bit about like what remains to be done. Like what are still the frictions that are preventing open source from being as big of a deal as we hope it will be.
I love hearing that 2025 is the year of open source. When I hear open source in the AI context, my thought process is always to try and figure out what the person using that phrase actually means by open source. I think AI, for better and worse, is still being talked about primarily from the context of models, and models being the kernel that makes it all tick, also suck up a lot of the oxygen in the discussions. To your question about the sober reality of it, open source has maybe a branding problem in this. Branding is maybe not the right word, a packaging problem. So if you go to any of the packaged solutions out there that are available for purchase or free trial, you're interacting with a whole stack of software. And I think I mentioned this on an earlier episode of Mixture of Experts this year, but the real things that are driving user success and joy are actually in my opinion, mostly at the software and user experience layer. And the quality of the model is enabling those. So the models need to keep coming along. But what you're really getting joy out of is the things that the application is doing with that model. The example for me in my not professional life is my son loves drawing his own Pokemon cards. And the fact that in Gemini, I can go take a snapshot of a sketch he did. He's 7.5 in second grade, and it can turn that sketch into a beautifully rendered Pokemon card for him is so cool. And, it's getting my second grader hyped about using AI. That has there's a great model behind that. That's the Nano Banana model. However, the UX of being able to do this all from my phone while, waking up on a Saturday morning, and presumably with a whole bunch of guardrails in the middle and actual software that's making sure that Nano Banana model is running the right number of generation loops and et cetera, it's a whole system at play there. So bringing this back around to your question, open source has all the bits and pieces. It has probably better bits and pieces in almost every single category of the logical architecture of these systems. But there is not yet a de facto standard way, or even a collection of de facto standards ways to pull them all together in 5 minutes to something that is going to achieve that same level of user experience and joy that you're going to get with a closed source solution. My view of what's been happening over this year, if you call it the year of open source, is that those patterns and those slots in the logical architecture have been getting refined, right? We used to think about an agent at the beginning of the year as just like a bunch of code that uses an LLM. We have a much crisper view of what an agent is today and what a tool is today and how they work together. And where the slots are around that tool that need additional code. So it's a complicated software architecture to put together a agentic AI system, and a lot of people have started to try to take stabs at how do you actually instantiate that with pure open source, and it's not quite there yet and settled. Like it's not a done deal yet. So I think. There's still a bunch of catching up to do in terms of just the finalizing of this is what it means to build an agentic AI system with open source parts. This is how it looks in closed source parts. They're logically the same thing, and you too can have this on your phone running in a matter of minutes, right? We're not quite there yet.
And I think that orchestration bit is really interesting because I guess it's also been in some ways kind of like a traditional open source weakness in some sense, right? Which is basically that like lots of people in open source don't like to have to be forced into some kind of architecture. They want to kind of take all the components and piece it together themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And also the other one is all the various bits and pieces are designed by different communities with different types of standards. So it's also really hard to build that as well.
Yeah, as an open source tinkerer, this is super fun, right? I enjoy that stuff, but that's also not going to, that's a me problem. That's not the rest of my family, let alone the rest of the world problem, right?
Yeah, that's right. And which has, I think, accounted for like open source, right? Obviously being like very successful in certain domains, but not others. Do you think that'll kind of be the case here as well, where it turns out in 26, right? We're going to start to see like, what are the kinds of, alignment of stars that allow you to actually have that kind of like common, call it middleware, whatever, right? Like these slots where all the bits and pieces can plug in. But like that will only really happen in some domains. And it might not even happen in, say, consumer, right? Or do you feel like you're more of an optimist? Like you feel like, oh yeah, we actually will be hitting on these across the board, across the use cases where AI might appear?
A couple of answers to that, right? So I think from a consumer standpoint, I suspect that we will see a high quality open source generalist agent of some variety emerge that is paired with open source models and sort of a full open top to bottom stack. I suspect that will happen next year. Like, I don't think we're very far off from that. And in fact, I suspect that will probably be something that you can almost pick and choose, like the level of quality you want that fits on your device that you want to run this thing on. But it still won't hit parity with the closed source labs, just scale, right? Like, it's hard to run those big models. Even the open ones that are extremely big, I couldn't run one of them. And I'd need a whole, cloud to run them on. So I might as, if I'm already, delegating out to a complicated piece of infrastructure for a model of that size, I might as well just use one that's already hosted for me. Unless there's a security sensitive nature that has to hit there. But I suspect we'll see it all come together. The other thing that I think we will see in the open is that the developer patterns will refine, right? So we'll end up with a much cleaner story when told to go build an agent that does X, Y, and Z and solves this problem. We already have a handful of the most popular things that sit at that framework level. But we don't necessarily have good instantiations of how to plug that together with the guardrails at the right points and the tools at the right points with the right security models, with the right, it's getting there. I think that those things will shake out to, a collection of de facto standards, both like interface standards, but also implementation standards for different domains. So I think we're going to see progress here. And I really think it's a two-sided world. Like, I don't think one is going to win against the other. I know, hearkening back to, operating system wars, you still don't see very many everyday users walking around running Linux on their laptops. But Linux is everywhere. It's running all of our servers. It's underpinning our Android devices. It's Unix variants thereof are underpinning our MacBooks. So I think many of these frontier labs are almost certainly building with open source components to build their perfectly crafted agentic systems that they're exposing as models. So I think it's going to follow that same trend where we have the bits and pieces out there in the open. We have really solid solutions purely in the open. And then we have better solutions in the closed that people are making money off of. And those things will continue to evolve.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Well, cause for optimism. I was saying that I think 2025 was the year of open source. Maybe it'll just turn out that 2026 is also the year of open source. So, Gabe, thanks for joining us.
Always the year of open source.
It's always been the year of open source.
Nothing exists without open source. It's just a question of how you get it.
That's right. But Gabe, thanks for joining us, and I appreciate your predictions.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you. Kaoutar, thanks for joining us for a few minutes to chat. As we get to the end of the year for MOE, we're asking all of our guests to do some predictions. Maybe just to start, let's do a little bit of a year in review. I mean, from your perspective in the world of AI hardware, what were the big standout stories for you this year? Like, what really, when you look back on the last 12 months, we'll say like, oh, you're going to remember 2025 for this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot to unpack for 2025.
Totally. Yeah.
I think 2025 was kind of the year where demand outran supply chain. So what we saw is basically 2025 kind of cemented what we already sensed, towards the end of 2024. AI hardware scarcity became kind of a structural constraint here, not kind of a temporary thing. So even with NVIDIA's record shipments and the rise of any kind of GPU, any GPU is better than no GPU, compute, demand, for LLMs, multimodals, video models, agentic workflows, really grow faster than what, the fabrication capacity can do. So I think for the first time here, companies, kind of begun optimizing kind of their entire business strategy around compute availability rather than model capability. So that's kind of become so important.
Yeah, because we literally ran out of compute, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And I also felt that kind of the AI hardware kind of diverge in two worlds. There is kind of the scale up and the scale out. So when we talk about scale up, we're talking about these super chips like the H200, the B200, the GB200, these massive clusters, Cerebras, AWS Trainium, Inferentia, Google Action TPUs, and then the scale out, which is more edge local, kind of where we saw things like DeepSeek optimizations, quantization breakthroughs, things like 1 to 3 billion edge-capable models, kind of the rise also of these small LLMs, and also heterogeneous compute, for example, with the Apple Neural Engine, the Qualcomm the NPUs. So it seems like it was kind of a divide in LLMs. Frontier labs prioritize, these huge clusters, but enterprises, and nations, they try to prioritize efficiency, sovereignty, and control.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the big trend. Where do you think we're going to go in 2026? I mean, are we going to resolve this supply constraint? What do things look like, you think, when we're talking, say, December 2026?
Yeah, I think that's going to continue. So, and I feel like 2026 will be kind of the year of frontier versus efficient model classes. We started even seeing that with Kimi K2. So, because a lot of the models assume infinite compute. And so it seems like I think we will see things kind of frontier, kind of 2.0 models, where we're talking about 1 to 5 trillion parameters, MOE everywhere, long context, multimodals, etc., still huge models, but also the efficient models, where we're talking about between maybe 500 million or 250 million parameters to 20 billion parameters. They're hardware aware, they're sparse, they're quantization friendly, they're capable of running on modest accelerators. And why? Because here we can't really keep scaling compute. So the industry really must scale efficiency instead. That's becoming a really important direction. And I think that's going to become even more like a big focus in 2026. Another thing, I think AI edge will go from hype to reality. So of course, we still have a lot of things happening in the edge. But running a frontier, we were talking about generative AI. Running a frontier model on your phone is still a fantasy. But running like a 10 billion model locally with maybe 4-bit quantization and using things like flash attention, these optimized kernels, it is feasible. So there's a lot of drivers behind these things like, maybe Apple, Qualcomm, Samsung NPU, changes at the level of the model architecture, looking at, hybrid architectures like the Mamba 2 with the transformers. New architectures are emerging that are kind of prioritizing efficiency constraints and edge constraints.
The other big question, of course, on everybody's mind when you talk AI hardware is NVIDIA. I think we've seen a lot of kind of interesting developments over 2025 of people, obviously still dependent on using NVIDIA platforms, but increasingly also experimenting elsewhere, right? I mean, between the announcements on Anthropic and I think OpenAI, in the last, few months even, have all kind of indicated that, they're exploring what they can do with TPUs, right? They're exploring what they can do with AMD. Do you think 26 will still be a very kind of like NVIDIA dominant year, or do you feel like this is like the year where maybe there's a little bit of an inflection point in the competition in that space?
I think, of course, 2026 won't kill the GPUs. They're still going to be, important, but it will challenge their dominance. I think we will see maybe early ASIC-based LLM accelerators in production, increased adoption of chiplet-based designs, maybe some first proofs of proof of concepts of analog in-memory accelerators, quantum-assisted optimizers for model compression and chip design, some also real commercial use of hybrid digital analog inference. So GPUs, I think, is still going to remain king, but I think a new generations of challenges will continue to mature.
Well, Kaoutar, we'll have to keep you, we'll keep posted on this, and we'll be looking to see how these predictions play out over the next 12 months.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll see what holds and what doesn't. And I think another thing that might also start playing is the rise of specialized chips for agentic workloads. Because agents change everything here. They're long running, they require memory persistence, they operate in these multimodal streams. They need, GPU, CPU, NPU, a lot of coordination. So maybe a new class of chips, what we call agent processors, can start to emerge here that are focused on these context persistence, low latency reasoning, fast planning loops, multimodal token streaming, energy efficient scheduling. And this is, where, for example, IBM style data flow architectures will really shine.
That's great. Well, we'll definitely have to keep you on the show to talk more about it. And thanks, Kaoutar, for your predictions.
Thank you.
Aaron, Abe, thanks for joining us. So you're here to talk a little bit about sort of the present and future of multimodal in these models. And I guess, Aaron, maybe the easiest way is to start with you. You've done a bunch of multimodal work this year around sports, is kind of my understanding. And I guess the question is, like, just in your own work looking into 2026, what are you excited for? How do you think the capabilities will open up? Are there things that you want to experiment with?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important to have, these types of generative, models be multisensory, so they can interpret our world and the way that we interpret it and see signals that maybe we can't, right? And these multimodal models are enabling agents to perform this type of contextual computing and maybe even effective computing so that they can better understand our emotions, how we're feeling, what we're doing, right? And I think, looking towards the future, we're going towards these neuromorphic, reasoning. So where it's like these systems that mimic the structure and function of how we are, right? So these multimodal models are going to be able to see, hear, and read everything, right? And then these models will be able to perceive and act in a world much more like a human. So they'll be able to bridge language, vision, and action all together. And I think, in the near future, we're going to start seeing these multimodal digital workers that can autonomously complete, these different tasks to interpret things, maybe even like complex healthcare cases, right, to help that problem, right? And then another area that I think is going to emerge is multimodal models are going to start running on these hybrid topologies, right? So it's going to be like these combinations of transformers, state space models, right? So in net, it'll make them more efficient and performant at the same time. So it's like the best of both worlds. But I'm really excited just about the potential that we have, and to watch how some of today's models, like Meta's Lava, IBM's Granite Vision, Nova, Dolly, so on and so forth, how they're going to change, right, and merge to make this multimodal experience better for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think where kind of agents meet multimodal will be really interesting because it'll just really expand the kinds of problems they can work on. Abe, for your work with Granite, it seems like multimodal is becoming more of a standard thing that all kind of open source provide model creators are just building in by default. Do you think that's going to become more of a norm in 26, that essentially everybody will just expect out of the box that there'll be some multimodal capability for these models?
I mean, in short, yes. But I think what multimodal will mean may shift a little bit in terms of just out-of-the-box performance. Specifically for Granite, I think what we're really trying to focus on is modular multimodal capabilities. So it's the idea behind being able to, let's say, take a number of different models or adapters and using them as a network of models to be able to carry out a use case. So if you do have a situation that requires, audio, image, as well as some workhorse LLM, in place of having an omni model that supports each of them, but maybe not best of class, you'd be able to tie them together as part of a function or as part of a workflow where you can call each capability as needed. So one, reducing your actual footprint, given some of these adapters are quite lightweight, they're LoRa or A-LoRa adapters, but also kind of capitalizing on a more state-of-the-art model, given you actually are using a kind of a focused capability as opposed to, some of the more, jack of all trades style models. So what we're really trying to focus on is modularity through orchestration, if you will, really doubling down on being able to wrap software around these use cases so that, you can not only, let's say, use, multimodal capabilities, but let's say you have specific, certainty checks that you want to do on output, and then, maybe rewrite your prompt because it didn't align with the actual request as needed. And then, maybe you want to reference the summary as part of your pipeline. So I think it's a little bit more about, obviously multimodal is at the center of it, or at least being able to enable multimodal, but it's using software orchestration to be able to tie a lot of these models together, so you have more of like a world view of in place of kind of like a static monolithic model.
Yeah. So Abe, something that you mentioned was LoRa, right? And being able to take in different functions and plug it in, and it's almost like having different skills, right? Yeah, and within sports, lots of what I'm doing today is I'm putting in vision skills I'm putting in, different types of speech to text skills. But I think it's also important in the future to have this human in the loop AI so that the human can fine tune and change the skill that's necessary to do the job at the right time to have the best kind of accuracy that we're looking for. Because I have noticed, and today's models that, they're quite big, to be able to, for example, take in a full length video, which, might be of, 1 gig size, but you got to chop it up, feed it in the model. But there's a lot of hallucinations that can happen. It might not, even with prompt tuning, it might not be able to pick up the exact kind of contextual cues. So, example in golf, it may not be able to pick up, where the ball lands precisely. Is it going to be in the bunker? Is it on the green? Second cut? Is it in the margin? Is it in the trees? Right? But it might just generically just describe what the landscape is, and it's not focused around the particular action point that we're looking for. So, having this human in the loop and using these Allura type adapters that you can just plug in, I think will really help to change what the focus is on the attention levels. So I do think that that's an area that we're going to see to help us, use these types of models better, right? And in the future to align it towards the use cases that we're trying to work on.
Yeah, for sure. Abraham, maybe a final question to you as we get into 2026. I mean, multimodal. There's a lot of modals. And so I'm kind of curious about if there's particular modals you think are modes rather that you think are more interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement about image, but what do you think about video? Audio, of course, is maybe less in the picture. Like, what are the kind of multimodal sort of like capabilities that you're most excited about?
So yeah, image, of course, but even within there, I think we can break it down where, our focus is really enterprise images. So, complex tables, complex charts, complex workflows. I think we're really starting to look into computer use. So being able to maybe extend control of the model to screen so that they can capture images and be able to kind of carry out activities. Audio is also a huge component of the Granite landscape. Our Granite speech model is one of the best performing models as part of like audio speech recognition on our OCR bench. And then we kind of double click into vision after that. So KBP extraction, so key value pair extraction, which is very top of mind use case for a lot of enterprises that want to take documents and pull data and pump it into a database so that they can use for downstream RAG tasks. Vision embedding as well is really big for us for RAG pipelines, kind of flattening the curve or flattening the pipeline as part of RAG use cases. So for us, I think from the multimodal perspective, we're less focused on text in, image out. I think that's just not a space that IBM really wants to play in, given the hyper focus on enterprise use cases. But yeah, I think 2026 for us is going to be really focused on kind of building out the ecosystem of our multimodal models, and then really understanding, where is the best place to use these models and showcasing that as part of our recipes, our notebooks, as well as just providing guidance to customers and consumers on when to pick the best model. And then building exactly what I mentioned earlier is like the orchestrational layer around, how do you start to use these models as part of more of a system as opposed to standalone? And what are some of the cool things that you can start to do with these models when combining them or chaining them, with other Granite models or third-party models?
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Aaron, Abe, thanks for joining us, and we'll see how some of these predictions play out in 26. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for listening. We're excited to have you along for the ride this year, and join us next week on Mixture of Experts.